Good evening, everyone who are joining us from here in India, and good afternoon and morning to the ones who are joining us from the western part of the world. Welcome to this very special session of D-Talks, or Disruptive Literacy Talks, as we call it. And I'm your host, Mashood Bhatt. In these series of talks, so far we've had uh, amazing speakers, ideas, which have really helped us decode and demystify the whole journey, the whole concept and approach towards foundational literacy and numeracy, and not just here from India, but also from around the world. And today we have a very unique and very interesting speaker who's joining us to really help uh, us understand better about how foundational literacy and numeracy has, how what the journey of it has been uh, around the world, what has been the approach of countries towards addressing challenges around foundational literacy and numeracy, and also how the different stakeholders that are attached to the broad education and system of ensuring literacy for the masses, how all these stakeholders, what role can they play, and also what innovative ideas or disruptive ideas have worked in different parts of the country at different points of time in history, from where we can learn and move forward towards meeting the goals of SDG 4. And to speak on this topic today, we have someone who is leading at the Open Society Foundation's Education Support Program. This is a global program dedicated to promoting the right to education and education as a public good. Uh, our speaker for today, he started his journey as a teacher trainee in South Africa, and has focused a lot on working in many countries, including rural areas. He's also had a breadth of and diverse, rich experience in early childhood care and education, community development, distance learning, HIV/AIDS prevention and care, and strengthening democracy and youth skills training. Our speaker today has also worked across the length and breadth of Europe and Asia. And presently, he is the director at the Open Society Foundations in the Education Support Program, focusing on global issues affecting education. It's an absolute honor for us to welcome Mr. Hugh McLean to speak on today's topic, which is the ground beneath our feet. Hugh, an absolute honor to have you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mashood, and greetings, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. So I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, and it's an honor for us to have you here, and more so looking forward to for you to demystify this topic of the ground beneath our feet. And if you could help us understand as to what was the philosophy behind this topic, and also if you could share a bit more about the wonderful work which Open Society Foundation is doing, just to start off our conversation.
Okay, well, thank you. Just, a few things by way of introduction. So first of all, when I was invited to this, I misheard the word detox. I thought it was detox, as in detox after you've had too much toxification. Right. So possibly that works as well, but I'm happy for it to be detox. And just the other thing to correct is I'm no longer director at the education program at Open Society Foundations. We have a fabulous new director, Camilla Crosso, who is formerly from the Global Campaign for Education. I'm now senior advisor and working in that capacity. So it's great to be doing that. I think I have I'm able to pursue some other ideas and talks such as this one with greater freedom. So just a word about the Open Society Foundations. If you haven't heard, Open Society Foundations is a foundation that was started by George Soros. It's been going for certainly 30 years, but started a bit before. And George Soros is a controversial billionaire for many, but someone who's totally committed to the idea of open society. We like him because he's controversial. I think as far as billionaires go, he's someone, for instance, one of the things he said is the problem with the system of capitalism is that people like me can make the money. But he, unlike other capitalists, I think, rather than going to the moon, I won't mention any names, has decided to spend his money on his ideas to promote societies that are open, more democratic, more just. And I would like to add to that more equal and more free as well. And as part of that, the education mission that we have is quite a broad one. It's focused on the right to education and education as a public good, education for all, actually, in its broader sense, rather than just for the elite. So that's where the foundation comes from, and I'm very, very proud to be associated with that work and with that mission in the wider world.
Right. That's wonderful to know, Hugh. And you've had a remarkable journey. Skipping around. I'm not sure if skipping is the right word, but really traveling across continents and across countries. And you've seen a lot of diversity as well in terms of be it middle income countries or more developed countries, etc. So when we talk about education for all, what was something which like really inspired you to make this a mission of your professional life?
Well, I mean, personally, I've just been really interested in education all my life. I wanted to be a teacher, even at school, and I have to say it's not because I was a terribly smart student. I repeated a year at school, and I struggled to maintain interest, but for some reason I loved school, and I think my challenge in education when I started was how would we keep young people like myself interested in what was going on, because I was fully present and there, but I got bored in classes and I enjoyed playing around like most other kids. So for me, the challenge with education is always how to make it interesting, how to tap into the natural talents that young people have and get them to discover their strengths. And so I think education systems really need to be about responding to young people, building on the strengths they have, and of course providing the core skills that we really need to function. But there's so much more to it than that. And then also because of the time and the period that I grew up in South Africa, the thing that shaped my politics and my life, of course, is 1976 and the student struggle in South Africa that changed that country completely in the end. But it was about a struggle for free and equal education that is still continuing. And that struggle shaped my life and my political life and my philosophy. So it's something I've been fully committed to ever since.
Right. Thanks for sharing that personal journey. You worked on a lot of different areas, and one area which was very interesting for us also was to look at teacher-led communities. And you've talked about teacher-led communities with respect to reducing teacher workloads, providing them a more supportive environment. And at this point of time, where the pandemic has, like really disrupted education in a very negative manner across the world, what would you say in terms of we need we need teachers right now to be at the very best in terms of, and for that they have to be themselves feel supported and their well-being is important. So would you like to share a bit more about what your perspectives are with respect to teacher-led communities, and is that something which could maybe help us at this point of crisis?
Yes, well, thank you for raising that. And I think the way you've said it is important, that teachers do need more support. I think the thing that I noticed about the epidemic, and the thing that was really prominent in the news, at least on this side of the world, in the UK and the news that I follow, is that during the lockdowns particularly, parents discovered how much work teachers do and how difficult it is really to apply themselves to a learning program. And even with the help of tech, particularly, even if you're looking at wealthier homes that have all the tech available that they need, even they struggled. So I think there was something of a reckoning with the idea of what it is that teachers actually do, and a greater appreciation for teachers, as there was for basic care workers and nurses and people that keep the shops open and society running, and all the people that we generally overlook in favor of people we regard to be more important, mistakenly, I think. And so there is something about, I think, the epidemic that made us think about that initially. In some ways, I think we've got back to business as usual, and the business as usual is, okay, well, kids need to go back to school. Teachers aren't doing the job they should do. They need to do it better, and it's their fault if things don't go right. And I think things have swung back a bit, but I don't think we should forget those early lessons. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, no matter what we say, we absolutely know, every one of us, that when it comes to teaching our children, the teacher's the person that matters. They absolutely matter. I noticed that when I was at school. I responded to certain good teachers, and the teachers that had something could pull in my interest and inspire me and do that. And when I taught for the years that I taught in school, I saw my first responsibility as a way of keeping the children interested and engaged, and that sometimes meant more play and engaging them in different ways, rather than just getting them to open a book and turn to page 23 and start reading at the top. That's not the way to do it. So the question is, how do we inspire teachers to do that every day, to give of their best every day, year after year after year, when we all know how drained we could get as parents within the first few weeks. And that's why you need teacher communities. And that's why I believe that teachers can find that space if they can support one another, if as a community of professionals, they're talking about the issues that come up for them every day, that they're able to work on that and do something to change things. If you try to drive teaching and improve quality with diktat from the top, you're only going to get a resistant response. We know ourselves, people. We're resistant to being told what to do, all of us. We need to be inspired. We need friendships. We need good working relationships. And those are the things that an education system or a good school should actually work on building. Because when you have that, you'll have a momentum and a spirit of enthusiasm that will carry over into all of the difficult slug work that needs to be done, that teachers know needs to be done with young people.
Right. It's a very interesting concept, and I was curious if there are any examples, any success stories where teacher-led communities have worked have worked well, and what is like that magic potion, or that magic powder which helps in making these teacher-led communities successful in different contexts.
Yeah, look, so I mean, based on our experience, I think firstly, we have to realize that teachers, even though they are crucial, they don't exist on their own. They exist in a school that has certain management structures, that has a particular tradition. They exist within a community that might have certain cultural ways of doing things that might be helpful or unhelpful. They exist within an education department and a local government that might have less money, bad habits, levels of crime, all sorts of things, and they exist in countries that that have different struggles with nationalism, problems with democracy, different ideas of freedom. So none of these things exist on their own. So I think the first thing is for us to understand it systemically and understand that actually for teachers to perform well, there does need to be a supportive systemic engagement from the education system. For me, that means believing in teachers. I don't think we can get anywhere if our starting point is that teachers are lazy or useless or not doing anything. There has to be belief in people. We know that we need that ourselves with everything, and that I think if the school system is built around putting trust in teachers, putting a belief in them, and having high expectations of them, but also providing the support for them to do things. A lot of schools and teachers dread, for instance, inspections. If the role of the school inspector it was or is, as I believe it should be, how can I help you, schools? How can I help you, teachers? I'm here. What can I do? That would change that relationship completely. The school inspectors often arrive to see what you're doing wrong, and say, well, that's good, that's bad, this is good, that's bad, you need to improve this. So there's a punitive element to that, whereas school inspectors should be at the service of the schools and the teachers to help them to do their work with greater enthusiasm, with greater joy. That would make a huge difference, but that then requires a systemic engagement and a commitment to that at the level of management, at the level of the system, and at the level of policy. So I think the things that help with that and with teacher engagement and teacher communities actually is, on the one hand, a greater organization among teachers, a greater sense of teacher agency, of teachers stepping forward to do it themselves, but also the enlightened leadership that will allow that space. There's some wonderful projects that have worked on that. There's a fabulous project at Cambridge University that talks about teacher leadership as one of their key principles in how to improve education and the quality of education. And they do a whole master's course that is taught by teachers in schools and accredited by the university. The University of Hertfordshire and Cambridge do a combined thing there. So I think there's some brilliant work in that area. It's groundbreaking, and a lot more can be done, I think, at that to strengthen the engagement of teachers from the point of view of the system and from the point of view of universities. And of course, the teachers' unions should be taking issues of pedagogy as seriously as they take the conditions of work and salary issues, in my view.
Right. Here we would like to take a couple of comments as well from our audience. So Roli Tripathi is saying a new definition of rewards and punishments is needed.
Totally.
And Shilpi Pandey is saying that the school environment must encourage teachers for creative engagement, challenges, yet accept their strengths and weaknesses. Yes. Right. And it's also when we are talking about that when we are talking about accountability of teachers as well, right? So traditionally we've followed like a carrot and stick approach, and so when we are talking about accountability comes with the whole making the whole system work, right? Essentially everyone is accountable to everyone, and ultimately everyone has to be accountable to the learning of the learner as well. So what would your approach be towards setting accountability of teachers and how our schools function? I mean, specifically teachers, if we say.
Yes, look, I mean, again, there's a context for this. I mean, I absolutely believe that anyone doing their job needs to be accountable for their job, right? But that also includes government officials and school inspectors and local councillors. And so, what is everybody's responsibility? And I think the key thing with responsibility is to look at it from the top down, not to start from the bottom up. So we need a government that is accountable socially to the electorate. And I think most governments find ways to skip out of that. And that kind of talent for skipping out of things is passed down. And the way you skip out of responsibility is by blaming other people. The way you take responsibility and are accountable is by saying, yes, that was my responsibility. I shouldn't have done that. I'll either resign, step aside, or fix it. So I think we have to look at that whole context. So if you're in a situation where the blame is passed on and everybody kicks the person below them, it's very difficult just to isolate and talk about teacher accountability in that context. So I think we need to think about balancing accountability. If we've got that, then we're very clear that there is an expectation that the teachers have, and we can take it very seriously. And I think they will do. If teachers don't feel that they somehow are to blame for poor education budgets, for inattendance at school, for poverty in the home, and somehow they need to fix this magically, by concentrating on a curriculum that's too overcrowded, with too much paperwork, and with inadequate support from everyone, that's the wrong context in which to be thinking about accountability. So there does need to be balance in it, but we have to be real about the accountability issues. Absolutely.
Right. That's a very important point which you've made, that when we're talking about accountability, it needs to start from the very top, from the policymakers and the administrators.
Demonstrated actively, yes. It needs to be demonstrated actively. Otherwise, it's pointless talking about teacher accountability.
Right. Here we would like to now enter the conversation on foundational literacy and numeracy, and it is truly the ground beneath the feet of students and of the whole education system in a way. We of course find ourselves in here in India, for example. There's a new mission on foundational literacy and numeracy, and there's a lot of air and aura around meeting the goals of universal foundational literacy and numeracy, even in the international context as well. What is your assessment of where we stand in terms of meeting the SDG 4 goals, focusing on foundational learning? And you've recently also written on how we might actually be on track on meeting some of the SDG 4 goals with respect to adult literacy as well. So would you like to share where you stand in terms of how we are progressing, and what does the pandemic mean for this whole journey of meeting the goals? Where do we go forward from here?
Look, there's lots of questions there. So let's just address the ground beneath our feet, which is the title, rather enigmatically, I think, of this whole session. But it was quite a practical title in the context which it was written, because it was about a special issue by the Center for Global Development based on Girendra Bihari's wonderful article on foundational learning, which challenged countries and foundations to take that a lot more seriously. And Girendra is the Director of Education for the Gates Foundation, also just stepped down now. But he wrote a wonderful and very challenging article, which in ultimately said this needs to be the priority. Foundational learning and literacy needs to be the priority, and actually all of the other stuff, by implication, of course, in the Sustainable Development Goal 4 for education, matters less. You know, if we can't do this by the end of primary school, we're wasting our time, people. So forget about everything else and do this. Powerful message, and very compelling at one level. And I think it's a message that has some currency globally, particularly among the donor countries and among big institutions such as the World Bank. It has currency because obviously everyone wants children to learn to read and write by the time they leave primary school, and schools haven't been doing that well. But it also has currency because it's actually cheaper and more focused just to do this and not everything else. So I think for me, there's a downside to that. There's a side that says we don't want to take responsibility for this whole mess. We just want to make you, give you the tools to do reading and writing properly, and then forget about everything else. And then if we are just going to measure schools and education systems on whether or not they can teach reading and writing in a narrow technical sense, I think we're losing an enormous amount. So this is quite a big debate globally, and it's one in which India features prominently, which you may or may not know, but everyone, of course, thinks they know everything about India and talks about India all the time. So it is quite interesting that we at this point having this discussion with you and your network, but it's a debate at which I have a different view from Girendra. I certainly believe that schools need to do that, but actually, I don't think the way to do that is by narrowing the education experience or by focusing too narrowly on what teachers should do. And it comes from, I think, one very, very simple insight, actually, and that is that you can't teach young children to read all day from 8 to 2 in a narrow sense, in the way literacy is taught now. That you need a broad education experience that will keep them motivated and keep them interested. And actually, if you were to change the way in which most literacy is taught, you could do it more quickly with a lot more fun and not spread over years. I believe it should be an intense program that is done quickly. What COVID has shown us more profoundly than just about anything is that social and emotional skills are just as foundational as reading and writing. In fact, foundational skills are all about readiness, confidence, relationship with friends, whether or not the children want to go to school, whether or not they feel safe there, whether they love it. All of those things matter. Any of us that have children know, and that does need to be part of what teachers do. It is already part of what teachers do, but it needs to be recognized, I think, more. So I think that, quite ironically, while I agree with the focus on foundational numeracy and literacy, I think the way to achieve it is not by narrowing our focus. I think the way to do it actually is by renewing our commitment to quality education and to affirming teachers and to expecting more from education and ourselves and our schools.
Right. That's a very interesting point where you're saying that the focus needs to be on foundational literacy and numeracy, but the focus should not be narrowed. Like there should not be like a tunnel vision that, okay, FLN is the only thing in town. And you also suggested that it should not take as long as it takes as well. So, I mean, would you like to share as to how this approach can be integrated in mainstream schools, and like how much of changing of mindsets, etc., will be required for this, if you have to make it actionable in mainstream schools?
Well, you see, this is where the teachers' community really matters, right? So if the teachers agree that we really need to get serious about the basic skills, the foundational skills of numeracy and literacy, right? They all say, well, what do we need to do? We need to make sure the kids have had a good meal, that the relationships are good, that they're happy, that they're safe in this environment. We need to be dealing with the things that are real for them, because unless we're dealing with that, they're not going to be concentrating properly. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if teachers are working together, it's not all about, okay, do we all now take the reading manual and drill this in every class? It's, how does the biology teacher use reading and writing to actually also teach? Can they be teaching something that actually reinforces what the language teacher did? Can you be doing that in science? Can you be doing that in cultural studies? So I think if teachers were working together, they'd be able to reinforce the program around numeracy and literacy without lessening the emphasis or the pace on it. But you can do it in a far more integrated way. And there's a lot of literature to show that literacy or foundational learning across the curriculum is the thing that matters, because it's like trying to color in a book with only one colored pencil. If you have a whole set of colors, you're going to have a far brighter book. It's the same with literacy. So get the geography teacher and the maths teacher and the cultural studies teacher, all of them to work together on the same kind of program. You need a teachers' community to do that. You can't do that by diktat from the top down. You need a vibrantly engaged and active teacher community to do it. That's supporting one another, supporting the children, talking about the problems as they go. If you're doing it in that way, you'll find that it can be done a lot more quickly. And you don't have to compromise all of those other important things about education. I firmly believe that, and I think we see that in schools. In fact, the better the school is, the wealthier area the school is in, the more they're committed to the broader approach. We're doing poorer kids a disservice if we limit their education experience by focusing very narrowly just on the skills and nothing else.
Right. We'll come back to foundational literacy and numeracy for children again. Here, I would like to bring the question of adult literacy, specifically SDG 4.6. And of course, adult literacy is, in our understanding, especially, it seems that it doesn't seem to have the same traction. Because the focus, and maybe rightly so, has to be focused on education. But there is, of course, like a lot of literature and research which talks about the multiple benefits of adult literacy, and how it has socioeconomic benefits, etc. What is your assessment of where we stand in terms of universal foundational literacy and numeracy for adults? Specifically referring to SDG 4.6.
Sure.
And yes.
So look, I realize I didn't answer that part of your question before about the SDGs and where we are and why they all needed to go together. So look, clearly COVID has had a huge impact on that, and it's going to take quite a while to catch up. It'll be a real setback, I think, when it comes. A lot of children, in fact, have dropped out some of the basic things we thought we were on the way to fixing. I think there's been an increasing number of dropouts, and particularly children from poorer families would have found that actually some of the skills they had picked up for reading will take a while to. So there does need to be a catch up. So I think there is a loss there. I do have, however, get back to my view that I think we need the breadth of commitment to all of those areas in the SDGs, including a commitment to adult literacy, and that this is just as important as foundational literacy and numeracy for children. And this is because I believe it's a social thing. Now, so there are a few things about that. Firstly, we have to remember that it took European countries over 100 years and a lot of development to become fully literate. In the 1800s and 19th century, it took a long time, and government spent a huge amount of money on it. A huge amount of money, far, far more than is being spent now. So it did take time. Where we really see the huge pushes for literacy was at the time of the liberation movements last century. A lot of those movements where there was questions of national liberation, and actually the struggle for against capitalism and colonialism, that united the population around some idealistic idea that pulled them together. Communism or socialism were, in many respects, very progressive, uniting forces initially. And they did a lot to galvanize people and populations. And we saw rapid increases of literacy among adult population as well as children population. And often the adult literacy came first before the children's literacy did, because you needed the adults to teach the children. Sometimes now we seem to think it works the other way around, but I'm not sure that it always does. If we compare where we are now with literacy of adult population and looking back 100 years, we're far in advance as to where we were 100 years ago, right? You know, the Chinese literacy rates, if you look at it, in the 20s were probably 13% of the population. Now those rates are over 90%, right? So if you're looking at it at one level, there is a real advance. We have more people, greater percentages of people, adults and children, reading now than ever before in human history. That's the first thing. It's not good enough, but we do have to recognize that. But if you look at two things primarily, of the literate population, those that can't read, most of them, 2/3 in fact, are women and are adult women. And that is really important for the status of women, for the independence of women, and the freedoms that women should be enjoying society just equally with anyone else. So, and particularly poorer women. So if we think of feminism, often which is cast for us, often at the level of women in top jobs, which is a particular bourgeois approach to feminism that you'll get from the West, capitalist West, but well, anywhere actually. But I think the real issue, of course, is rural women and women struggling at the other end, and what it means to their lives to be literate. That I think needs to be a huge focus of the work. And women, of course, are the first teachers of their children primarily. And a literate mom is going to have literate children. It's just the way it works. So I think that is a big struggle. And I think it's a struggle that's eclipsed and forgotten with a focus just on foundational numeracy and literacy. The second thing to say is we need to look really hard at the definition of literacy. And UNESCO is doing some really interesting work coming up with redefining the idea of literacy. What is functional literacy? And actually, it's a lot more than what we have now. And I think if we use the new definitions about functional literacy, whether or not you are able to think independently, to use a language well, and to be able to write and read in it, that's a very, very different notion. And I think we're still far behind globally at the level of the kind of functional literacy that we normally see. But these are literacies that are linked to confidence, political confidence, social confidence, economic confidence, the ability to use those skills to advance your life meaningfully, to advance your family's life, to advance your community's life. That's where we really are falling down on. And that's why we shouldn't have a narrow idea of what literacy is. And why it needs to be linked to our idea of democracy and idea of personal freedoms and idea of ending patriarchy in our societies. It's completely fundamental to all of that. And I'm worried that we lose that with an overemphasis on children's literacy at school in this very narrow way.
Right. I think that's a very important point. And this also resonates with some of what our earlier speakers have said in terms of, there's a lot of push on digital literacy, financial literacy in rural areas, financial inclusion of, having women self-help groups. But that one step, that initial step, which really takes them towards all these different possibilities of inclusion would be if they have the basic ability to sign the bank document or be able to use the ATM that is there in the village as well. So great. Thank you for sharing these points. And you did mention briefly about China and other countries and how they club their literacy movements with other national struggles of independence as well. What would be some lessons that we can learn from these countries who started with a small baseline of literacy and have really managed to pull out a huge population and make them literate?
Yeah, I mean that's such an interesting question, isn't it? You know, and if you look at it from the point of view of foundational numeracy and literacy, the question is, how would you turn this into a mass movement, you know, that has a real sense of commitment? And again, ironically, you don't do it just by saying this is important. No, it's really important. It's really, really, really important. You'll do it by showing how foundational numeracy and literacy is linked to people realizing a greater freedom in their lives. Freedom for themselves, freedom for others, freedom for their families, greater ability to engage in society. So actually, it is about social status. It is about economic growth. It is about democracy. It is about engaging people meaningfully in the lives that they live. It's about our cultural engagement and appreciating culture. So it becomes about all of these things because that's the thing that will inspire people. People were committed to national liberation and ideas of communism or socialism, not for ideological, dogmatic reasons. It's because it lit a fire under them that our lives can be different if we do these things. Our lives can be different. If we work together for this together, we can build a place that is better for us, a community that's better for us and better for our children. That's actually what we need to struggle for. And the problem we have with our governments today is that there's so much going on at the top and so much going on in the news that any of us ordinary folk don't feel we can get a look in, right? You know, because the show's somewhere else. And you know, the whole point about a movement is you don't recognize that the show is somewhere else. You don't accept that. The movement is that says, but actually, this is our show. We're going to determine the script for this. We're going to take it the way that we want it to. And that's what the liberation movements had. They had that sense of ownership from the bottom up. So if we look at our unequal world, and the other thing about COVID, more billionaires made per week, I think, during the time of COVID than whatever, and a far greater inequality between top and the bottom in our world, our whole world now, than we've ever had before, ever. That's trouble. That's trouble in the longer term because there's less freer money, there's less money on the ground, there's more frustration. If you look at what happened in my own country, South Africa, over the last weeks, that huge explosion that we saw, sure, politically manipulated, but it was like lighting a spark in a dry forest. So there are serious issues where people have questions about their livelihoods, their future, and the future of the planet being at stake. And any vision we have for education and for freedom and for foundational numeracy and literacy, I would argue, needs to tap into that vision because that's what people care about, right? It's not a separate thing from that. We have to link to the basic things that matter in our societies and our world. Unless people can really grasp that, we're not going to get the momentum that we need to achieve anything we need.
Right.
To achieve.
That's a very interesting take, and you know, when we are looking at history and learning from this, there's so much going on, you know, behind the movements of literacy. You know, that the momentum and the fuel which is required to start the literacy movement often has had to also rely on the social movements and the political movements as well. Right.
Yes. Just to mention, I mean, I think we have to now, it's the centenary of the man's birth. Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian educator, had this phrase, we need to learn to read the world, not just the word. And I absolutely love that because that's what it's about. Reading the word is boring. Who wants to read the word? You know, I mean, you can't inspire a child. Right. It's a code of scribbles on paper. If you link it in a relevant way to people's lives, and if you can link that idea to their personal freedoms and freedom for them and their societies, that's the thing that matters. And that's what I think some of our greatest teachers have understood and are, you know,
right.
That's what's inspired people and taken them forward. So as I say, Paulo Freire, I think October this year, 100 years of his birth. But he's one of the greatest literacy teachers. I think that inspiring teachers that the world has seen. He wrote about literacy and national freedoms.
Absolutely, a very, very inspiring personality for educators to learn from as well. Even though, like you said, 100 years of anniversary. Here, I would also like to bring in an observation which we see with respect to a lot of projects that are working on education, and now more so with foundational literacy and numeracy having like a lot of traction with respect to international multilateral organizations as well. A lot of work is driven and supported by financial aid by aid agencies from international organizations, and of course, that often dictates who is working where, what are the outcomes, etc. Uh, what would your take be on how can we make financial aid, international aid, more more aligned with the needs of the local communities? Is there, do we see any progress in that direction in your assessment?
The short answer is no. And I suppose linked to that is yes, we should. But look, I think there is clearly far too much power at the top. The power is where the money is, and that's why I think I worry about narrow agendas, because sometimes these big institutions will be taking decisions based on other criteria, their idea of efficiency, their idea of how to use their money well, their idea of how to explain to their board that we spent this money and we see X, Y, and Z as a result. And that's a very narrow way to look at things. International funders, particularly international institutions, need to have the humility, and I've said in the piece that I wrote, to listen, to learn as much as they want to teach, and that has a responsibility for listening. And I don't mean this in some kind of vague sense, whether this is a nice thing to do. I think it's fundamentally important. As I said, the things that really inspire us about education are the bigger questions. You've got the World Bank telling us about human capital, which matters to them. I worry about the fact that we just take up words like that and use them as if that's the way to talk about things. Human capital is a very, very narrow concept. If we go back to some of the greatest Indian thinkers, Rabindranath Tagore said the highest education is an education that doesn't merely give us. I'm reading because I've forgotten. Give us information, but makes us live in harmony with all of existence. Those things are really that's really important. So I think we need to change the discourse here, and it does mean that there needs to be greater confidence coming from the recipients of aid, whether they're communities, whether they are countries that are actually able to stand back and say, listen, you've got this wrong. We're the people on the ground. We know what is actually needed, and we're going to tell you what is needed. There does need to be some kind of flip or revolution, if you like, in that relationship. It's a difficult one, but unless we start it somewhere, and unless people start speaking up confidently and saying, actually, we're not going to use this terminology that you've used. It doesn't suit us. We think about things differently. We'll think about it in this way. So it requires that kind of confidence, but it requires a kind of critical thinking and engaged and organized, I think, groups of people on the ground who can begin to push back against that. And I think there's a role for forums such as this and organizations such as those that you have, because you can open ways for this thinking in ways that's very important. It needs to be validated. It needs to be supported and developed and created.
Right. Thanks for sharing that perspective as well. And when we were earlier talking about a people's movement, right? So while of course there's a lot of dependence now on aid agencies, be it international aid agencies or domestic aid agencies as well, and of course they are like driving a lot of literacy and education projects as well. But when we talk about something, it's based on our assumption that education and literacy is a costly initiative which requires a budget and which is expensive. But when we talk about the people's movements, which you talked about, right, where everyone becomes part of this, in a way, this assumption might be challenged. So my question would be that, like we've had historical examples, but now coming to the current time and the current situation, do you think what will it require to have a people's movement for education? I mean, children are in schools, right? So is it only the responsibility of teachers to make sure that everything's going on fine? How do we ensure others also join in?
No, of course not. I mean, first of all, to any politician or policymakers that tell you that education or literacy or education is expensive, the answer should always be, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance and see where that gets you, because it's going to be a lot more expensive over the long run, believe you me. So there does need to be a level of farsightedness. But I'm a great believer in social movements and organizing from the bottom up, actually. I think that all change has come from people organizing and around different ideas, whether it's the end of colonialism, whether it's democracy, the vote for a woman, the woman's vote, all of the social welfare things, everything we've seen, the 5-day week, children not working in child labor, ends to exploitation. That has all come from social movements organizing for something different. So that's actually where the hope is. The wrong thing to do is to sit back and expect politicians to do the right thing, or to believe them when they tell you they're going to do the right thing. What we need is social movements that start to say, actually, we need to work out what the right thing is. We need to get together with people that agree with us, and then we need to tell the politicians that this is what you need to do. And if you don't do this, you're going to hear from us. So it's got to happen the other way around. And there's something about our media and our political systems that make us have to learn that lesson almost every generation. So of course it's not up to teachers, it's up to communities, it's up to parents. And when we do look at movements, there's enormous inspiration always in social movements, as you've seen. In India has had a rich, fabulously inspiring history of brave social movements that have changed thinking in India and in the world. But we see particularly brave and courageous movements among students at the moment, and among teachers, and those things need to be supported. So I think we need to be coming together at that level, linking those to the kinds of struggles that communities have around housing, around sanitation, around power and electricity. The struggle that we've seen, the farmers' struggle in India, was something that inspired the whole world, actually. It might have been frustrating to have tractors in the road when you wanted to get somewhere, but those kinds of civil actions are really important, because they are about people saying, we're not just going to sit back and believe everything we're told. We are going to start shaping things for ourselves. Education is part of that range of things that needs to be taken forward and built from the bottom up in terms of social, of some form of social organization and social struggle.
Right. On that note of optimism and reaffirmation in the power of people to create transformative change, we'd like to thank Mr. Hugh McLean for these very inspiring ideas, and also a refreshing talk to also look at literacy and foundational literacy in a very different way. We've spoken about how FLN is not just about scribbling codes, but it's about reading the world, not just reading the word. And it needs to be seen in a more holistic manner. And also, like Hugh's wonderful, primer on social movements and how they've really helped create huge literacy movements as well, where we can learn from. So once again, we'd like to thank Hugh. Thank you so much for joining us in this session of Detox. And thank you to all who are joining us live as well and who will be watching this video. There are a lot of food for thought, which Hugh leaves us in this session.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've just scratched the surface on all of these things, and there's so much we didn't get to, but it's been a wonderful privilege talking to you all. And thank you so much, Ashud, and to Detox for asking me to come along. I've really, really, really appreciated it and enjoyed it enormously. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.